evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. You often hear people say you can't have a country without borders. You can't have a country if you don't have borders. But that's also true of airspace, which is itself a kind of border. So maintaining control of the skies over the United States, deciding who comes in and out and on what terms, that's one of the most basic duties of the Pentagon and has been since aviation began. If you were to fly your Cessna into restricted airspace in parts of this country, the U.S. military would scramble jets and they might shoot you down. So it's not a small infraction. Unless, of course, you happen to be the Chinese government and you're operating an enormous white dirigible designed to spy on American nuclear installations. In that case, you could relax. You've got friends at the White House. Absolutely nothing is going to happen to you. Now, that's not an imaginary scenario. We're not guessing. We know it's true because we're seeing it right now. As you've doubtless heard, an enormous spy balloon the size of several school buses has floated over from central China. It's currently, we think, drifting across the continental United States. Yesterday, it passed over Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. That's one of only 3 places in this country that houses Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missiles. By this afternoon, the Chinese spy balloon had made it to Kansas City. And there, over the skies of that city, a pilot flying a private plane at 47,000 feet came close to hitting the Chinese spy balloon. Derelict balloon adrift, he said, in a notice to other nearby pilots. But it was not a derelict balloon. It was a balloon being controlled by China. In other words, here we have a foreign military aircraft over our country, spying on our critical defense installations and posing a threat to civilian aviation. That seems like a big deal. If you want to know how big a deal, consider how would we respond if Putin were doing this? If this were a Russian spy balloon? Well, you'd have the world's shortest news story. Russian spy balloon spotted offshore. Entire U.S. Air Force mobilized. Balloon reduced to vapor in seconds. So no, there would not be a lot of debate about what to do about a Russian spy balloon. We'd kill it instantly, as you would any hostile foreign intrusion. But things turn out to be a little different when it's a Chinese spy balloon. As far as we know, Vladimir Putin has never sent cash to Joe Biden's crackhead son. He probably should have. That would have been a very wise investment in retrospect. The Chinese government, long thinking as always, did send cash to Joe Biden's crackhead son, and apparently to Joe Biden himself. And that paid off. Watch some robot from the Pentagon tell you that you have no right to know anything about this Chinese spy balloon. You think you're a citizen or something? Here it is.
Position of the balloon classified?
Phil, right now, what we're not going to do is get into a hour-by-hour location of the balloon. Again, we're monitoring it closely. As I mentioned, right now, it's over the center of the continental United States. That's about as specific as I'm going to get.
But I understand it might be inconvenient, but does the public not have a right to know if a balloon is over their state?
The public certainly has the ability to look up in the sky and see where the balloon is.
The public has the right to look at the sky. Go stare at the sun. That's what the guy just said. What you didn't hear was a lecture about how the Chinese military is a threat to our democracy and our American way of life. It's not like the Chinese invaded Ukraine. No, just our country. So no big deal. Stop asking questions. Joe Biden, of course, took that very same position today. Watch.
Remember what the economy was like when I got here? Jobs were hemorrhaging. Inflation was rising. We weren't manufacturing a damn thing here. We were in real economic difficulty. That's why I don't. Thank you.
Mr. President, when and how will you remove the balloon? When and how will you remove the balloon, Mr. President?
Notice the calm smiles. Walk this way, Mr. President. They knew they weren't going to answer questions on that. And it raises a much bigger question, which is why? What's going on here? What else do they know but refuse to tell us? Well, today, Pentagon sources conceded that the Biden administration has actually been tracking this Chinese spy balloon for months since it left China. That means they watched it float over the Pacific, they watched it pass over the Aleutian Islands and into American airspace. And at any time, they could have shot it down over the water, by the way, risking no life on the ground. But they didn't do that. Why didn't they do that? No one will say. Instead, the trusty Pentagon robot offered this explanation. This is one of the dumbest explanations ever articulated from a podium in Washington. Here it is.
You said that this is violating our airspace, so why not take it down?
We assessed that it does not pose a risk to people on the ground as it currently is traversing the continental United States. And so out of an abundance of caution, cognizant of the potential impact to civilians on the ground from a debris field, right now we're going to continue to monitor and review options.
So the U.S. military is in fact protecting you by letting a Chinese spy balloon hover over our nuclear facilities. That is, in total, an insultingly ridiculous series of sentences. They make no sense. But the administration's position on the Chinese spy balloon becomes not just ridiculous, but scary when you learn that this is not the first Chinese spy balloon. Other Chinese spy balloons have flown over this country, and the Pentagon didn't shoot them down either. Now, you probably didn't know that because nobody told the public about it. The existence of those Chinese spy balloons was classified. Apparently, it still is classified. Joe Biden's Pentagon briefers didn't say a word about it today, as you just saw. And by the way, it's not just Chinese spy balloons over this country, it's many other countries. Nearly identical Chinese spy balloons have been dispatched by the Chinese military into the airspace of Japan and India and the Philippines, and in at least one case, probably all cases, at least one we know of, over a military installation. So Chinese spy balloons are actually kind of expensive to make, and there's a diplomatic risk in deploying them over other people's airspaces. We're seeing that happen now. So you don't do this on a whim. Hey, let's send spy balloons over the United States. You do it for a reason. The question is, what's the reason? We're going to try to get to the bottom of it if we can. We're joined now by someone who's paid a lot of attention to surveillance. His name is Nicholas Chalian. He's the former chief software officer of the U.S. Air Force. Mr. Chalian, thank you so much for coming on. What do you think is going on here? What's your best guess?
Well, you've seen effectively the biggest experiment from China, where they first of all got probably a very high rate of high-definition pictures of those sites, right? And keep in mind that the balloon is at 60,000 feet, so they're able to get better pictures, higher definition pictures of the sites. Of course, the balloon is also much slower than a low-orbit satellite. Additionally, you've seen the ability for China to understand how quickly we're able to detect the balloon and also respond to it, and also take some insight when it comes to our electronic warfare capabilities. And finally, of course, you've seen China getting some insight when it comes to the ability to understand how the leadership at the Pentagon and the White House are able to respond to this.
Well, I think your last point is a particularly interesting one. So you have to know when you launch a spy balloon the size of several school buses that someone's going to see it. And so then you're going to find out if the country has the will to resist your incursion into their airspace. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, but it's also interesting, right, because I don't think they were trying to hide the balloon, so they were probably trying to test us more than anything else and trying to see how quickly we're able to respond and also see what kind of capabilities we have when it comes to electronic warfare, because that's also the ability for us to hide some of the data they're trying to gather when it comes to flying over the Air Force Base.
As we said a minute ago, and it has not been widely reported in the U.S. press, but balloons of this kind from China have been spotted over a bunch of different countries. We're getting a report right now, as we're speaking, that one has been seen tonight over Latin America, somewhere in Latin America. Does that surprise you?
It's not surprising. Obviously, we know they have multiple instances of these balloon activity. In fact, there was other use cases over U.S. territory as well. So this is not even the first time this happens over the United States.
Amazing. Nicholas Chalian, thank you so much for coming on site and that perspective. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So as we said, this Chinese spy balloon came to the attention of most Americans yesterday when it was spotted flying over the state of Montana, a military base, a base with intercontinental ballistic missiles. Now, the Pentagon did not inform the governor of Montana about it until after the balloon was over Montana. So, of course, they would have known because they've been tracking it since it left China. But they didn't tell Greg Gianforte, who's the governor of that state and reputed to be, we can't say we don't live there, one of the best governors in the country. We're happy to have him join us tonight. Governor, thank you for coming on. They knew it was coming over your state. You're the chief executive of your state. Why didn't anyone tell you, do you think?
Well, when I got briefed, this slow-moving balloon was hundreds of miles into Montana. It had already flown near the Air Force Base and the ICBM silos. When I finally got informed it was over our most populous city, it got spotted by a photographer at the airport.
Well, that's bizarre. I mean, that suggests deception. Of course, if you're the federal government, you alert state governments. You're the head of your state government when something like this happens. Do you have any sense what the backstory could be here?
You know, I don't. I just know, Tucker, if it was up to Montanans, this thing would have been taken out of the sky the moment it entered our sovereign airspace. And it clearly had been there for a while. It's not moving that fast.
Yeah. Unfortunately, a 308 does not extend to 60,000 feet. So you really need some kind of missile. Why do you think? So, I mean, that's really the question. From your perspective, it's a pretty clear case of we know what to do next. Shoot it down. Why do you think they didn't?
Well, I'm not sure. Initially, in the briefing I got earlier in the week, they were contemplating taking it out of the sky. For whatever reason, they didn't do that. Now, clearly, this went to the president's desk. He was given options. For whatever reason, he chose not to act. And unfortunately, the result of that is that Americans are endangered and our enemies are emboldened.
Amazing. Governor, I hate to pull random video off the internet and ask you to respond to it, but this is going around. It appears to be, it's on social media, video of an explosion over your state showing what looks like a smoke trail into the sky. We can't even guess as to what this is. Do you have any information about this?
Not at this point. I was notified of it just minutes before we came on the air. We're monitoring the situation. I'm talking to our National Guard to find out if they have additional information. I'm sure I'll be briefed here in the next hour.
Last question. The explanation from, as I know you heard, the administration is we didn't shoot this down over Montana because we feared the wreckage would hurt people on the ground in Montana. But I hear you saying, as the governor of Montana, you would have shot it down. So that's not a concern that would have prevented you from acting.
Well, Tucker, you've been to Montana.
Yeah,
Eastern Montana is probably one of the best places to take it down. Yeah. We could have contained it. We could have found out what the mission truly was by recovering whatever electronics are on this balloon. Again, if the Americans had flown a spy balloon over China, do you think it'd still be in the air? Of course not. We should have taken action. Unfortunately, we've emboldened our enemy today.
That is exactly right. And that's such a smart point. Governor, I appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you.
My pleasure.
So there's always been violence in schools, but since George Floyd died and the authorities decided, well, some people can't be restrained from hurting other people, we're going to ignore crime, and that's really what they decided, there's been a huge increase in the number of brutal beatings, some of them racially motivated, inside schools. Because again, a lot of schools have stopped disciplining students who are from underprivileged backgrounds. The latest beating happened on a school bus in the state of Florida. It is awful. Kevin Cork has that story for us tonight.
Wait a something, Tucker. Evening to you, my friend. And a word, frankly, it's infuriating. And one of the many reasons that so many parents who are able to are now opting out of some schools. A vicious assault, a Miami-Dade student arrested following the beating of that young girl on a school bus. It actually happened on Wednesday. At least 2 minors were involved in the attack on the little girl. One of them, as you can see there, is a boy who Fox has learned tonight will in fact be charged in the attack. However, this is important, Miami-Dade Schools police apparently only gave the 14-year-old, who's not been identified, a civil citation, even though in this situation to make a criminal referral to the DA and even charge him as an adult, since this was obviously a battery or an assault. Now, the school district also says it will discipline the other students involved in the video fighting on that bus. The students involved were from Coconut Palm K through 8 Academy in Homestead. There's a mom out there. Her name is Jenny. She speaks to CBS Miami. It's a station down in Miami, Florida. She tells them that it was her 9-year-old daughter and her 10-year-old son who were assaulted on that bus. She says physically, Tucker, tonight they are mostly okay, but she acknowledges that they are obviously traumatized. By the way, that 18-second video has been shared thousands of times and has amassed over 16 million views. It is disgusting to watch and a sad commentary indeed, Tucker.
Kevin Cork, I appreciate that report. Thank you.
You bet.
So if you go to any liberal part of the country, you see a lot of people who may have mental illness. It looks that way. They're wearing masks outside. But there may be another explanation for why they're wearing masks outside. Really interesting. A new study has revealed it. We're going to tell it to you next. Plus, a shocking story all over the internet. A man was fired for refusing to wear a mask while working outside. That man joins us next to share what happened to him. We'll be right back.
And they were dumbfounded when I told them that I'm not willing to wear a mask anymore. And they then changed their story, and apparently it is a fireable policy because I have been terminated.